right now. Okay, so hey everyone, we are talking about what is Santa Barbara. So for today, you watched a couple tourist uh, tourist videos, which I wasn't sure initially if I should assign them. I wasn't sure if um how all of you would feel about me bringing these very kind of travel bloggy. One is from Travel and Leisure. These very travel consumer kinds of videos into our history class, but I think that these videos kind of give us an idea of a really broad conception of what Santa Barbara is, who it's for, how, and kind of how it came that way. So let's get into it. So, what is Santa Barbara? Before we get too into it, though, I do again want to remind that your weekly response is due Friday at 11:59 p.m. as a PDF or a docs file. You need to answer these two questions. What can understanding Californian flora and fauna do for our understanding of California history? How can considering non-human centered history help us better understand human centered history? And the second question I want you to consider is what can studying local Santa Barbara history, as we will be talking about today, do for our understanding of broader Californian history? So is this a contrast to big or deep historical approach of history that we discussed on Tuesday, or is this a similar kind of deep history but just much more focused? So there isn't a right or wrong answer, especially to this last question I'm posing. I just want to know your point of view. A few responses have already been turned in. I graded them, so these are out of 6 points. If you want 6 points, you're going to have to really dig in, not only just reference the material, but like really dig in to get into, what are the stakes of not only the questions that I'm asking, but how you're using these sources to answer the questions that I'm posing. Also, how are like what are the there are even bigger stakes of like why are we even studying California history just as itself in the first place? So I'm saying this. I feel like it's a refrain in a lot of undergrad courses, even grad courses, all classes probably, but be specific, dig in deeply, answer questions why and how. Like once you write a sentence, stop and ask yourself why. And if it doesn't make sense to ask that question for the sentence, ask yourself how, and don't type either why or how, but ask yourself that and then write a sentence. That is how you ensure that you're at least starting to dig deeply. So please do those things if you want to get a 6 out of 6. 5 out of 5 ain't bad. I do tend to grade harder at the beginning and kind of ease up by the time we're at the end. That's just because I want you to really try hard, really go for it. And then at the end of the quarter, when you're working on projects, I really want you to just make sure that you're focusing on that. So keep that in mind. If I'm going to be grading these on Saturday and Sunday. So if you do not necessarily get the grade that you want, for these first few, feel free to make an office hour appointment with me. Feel free to just reach out and we'll figure it out. Also, another reminder is that next week, can't believe we are at the end of week 1, but week 2 is all asynchronous because I will be in the redwoods. You can see me here hugging a tree. I think this was about 3 years ago. Um, like I said, bona fide tree hugger right here. It's me. I will be doing redwood preservation of a site called Lions Ranches. It was a site actually 3 years ago. I had worked on a landscape report on. I did field work there. So now I am doing the flip side of it, which is learning how to uh, use redwood as a preservation material and help fix 19th century structures. Very excited. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm really excited to learn how. So because I'm going on that adventure, all of your lectures will be asynchronous next week. They will be posted by Saturday. Your weekly response will also be posted by Saturday, and it will be due on Thursday at 11:59. And because I will be in the woods, I will not be able to answer email as quickly as I would usually like, but I'll still try to answer email within 24 hours. If you do not hear from me in 24 hours, do not panic. It just might mean that I ran out of energy on my power bank, and I am trying to rush to find an outlet to plug in my phone and then rush to find some Wi-Fi or service so I can answer your email. If you don't hear from me in 2 days, maybe be a little concerned, but I'm sure I'll be fine. So all of that being said, again, week 2, asynchronous. These lectures are on northern, in scare quotes, Northern Californian indigenous groups, and then again in scare quotes, Southern California indigenous groups, and then a bit more about colonization. We're going to, because we're doing kind of a long view of Santa Barbara today, you're going to be hearing a bit about some of that, but we will be diving much more deeply into the Santa Barbara mission history, the wealthy families who were part of that, Mexican land grants, etc. More of that next week. So I'm super excited. Hope you are too. And let's just dive on into what is Santa Barbara. So the videos that I signed for you to watch today, a lot of them were painting this picture of a weekend getaway. You have, it isn't necessarily a place where people live. It is definitely a place where a lot of people visit because it is beautiful. It is sparkling. Look at that ocean. Look at that architecture. Look at that, like, female presenting woman's hair that looks just so beautiful in the glorious radiant, like, daylight as she holds her wine glass. Santa Barbara is understood by many as a very picturesque place, and maybe you experienced similar things before you came here, or if you had a campus tour before you started here as a student, maybe that was some of your or your family's conceptions of Santa Barbara as well. If people are lucky enough to live here, usually we relate it to celebrities who live in like Montecito or high in the hills. We have Oprah. Santa Barbara has Oprah. We also have Ellen, and most recently, we have gotten an actual Prince of England and his beautiful wife, Meghan Markle. So that's, if you are lucky enough to live in Santa Barbara, you're going to need a lot of money. At least this is what kind of the bigger cultural understanding of Santa Barbara. Though having lived in Santa Barbara for 3 years, I will say I would not have been able to live there without subsidized housing, and it is incredibly expensive, and it's because it's incredibly beautiful. But these again are some kind of conceptions about what Santa Barbara is. This is also, complicated. This is also kind of all of this wealth, elegance, partying if you're on State Street pre-pandemic, or Ivy, hopefully pre-pandemic and not currently. But all of this kind of decadence is happening in the shadow of, or in the valley under, how whatever metaphor you want, of Mission Santa Barbara, this beautiful building that was created in the late 18th century by the missionizing efforts of Father Sarah. It is still a mission. You can go to mass there if you have any inclination. They have 3 different chapels. They also have museums talking about the histories that piece of land has experienced. It is very focused from the creation of the museum and on, but we have this beautiful mission that is a last a last example of Spanish empire in Santa Barbara. Of course, that isn't true. If you just walk a couple blocks away from the Mission, half of the streets are named Spanish names. But this again is kind of part of the mythology of Santa Barbara. Um, if you were raised, if you did K through 12 in California in fourth grade, you may have done a mission project, and that also kind of has helped this mythologizing, this understood kind of cultural dreaminess, we could say, around the Mission. And again, we will get into the Mission next week because it isn't quite like that. But a lot of people see the Mission and they're like, oh, dang, that's really cute. That is a beautiful building. Um, and this beautiful building is the prime example of a trend that continues all throughout the city, which is this architecture. This is the proper name of it, but it is in heritage and preservation studies and in history. This is called the Spanish Fantasy Past. It is shown in architecture. It's also shown in different sorts of design elements, both inside and outside. Here are some examples. If you want more information about this is just something I'm super interested in, and has nothing to do with what I study. But here are two really good books about it. They talk primarily about LA and San Diego. There is mention of Santa Barbara, and we can definitely see these design elements used. So a half paraphrase, half quote by Carrie McWilliams, earlier 20th century historian of California, kind of describes this as an idyllic version of the California time period, with harmony at the missions, when Californians were all members of one big, happy, guitar-twanging family who danced the fandango and lived out days of beautiful indolence in lands of the sun that expand the soul. So this idea of just kind of a pastoral, sleepy town is something that we can see in a lot of these pictures, right? Again, if you want more information about that, I definitely recommend these two books. They are very good. Another thing that is part of Santa Barbara that we need to make sure that we talk about is that it's also, in being seen as a tourist destination, it's also seen as a place of nature recreation. So you can kayak in the channel, you can kayak in the lagoon, you can surf anywhere. The show Gidget in the 1960s popularized this idea. It was set in Santa Barbara, and it popularized this idea of having a huge surf culture in Santa Barbara, which we still have. And just the beautiful water, also the beautiful Santa Ynez Mountains. We are truly, like, just thinking of times I've been on campus, like, we are truly in a beautiful place there. So that it, again, is contributing to this just kind of pastoral idea of what Santa Barbara is, who it's for, and what you do there. And then when you're done doing all of that, we have seafood and wine. Go get yourself a glass if you partake. Get yourself I'm gonna guess that's a lobster. If you also partake, I don't really have either of these things. But again, Santa Barbara is seen as a place where, where you recreate and then you eat and drink yourself silly, so you are prepared for another day of recreation and strolling around. But like, what it really is Santa Barbara, I assume that most of us, especially if you've ever lived in Santa Barbara or been there for a day, don't necessarily think it's that or know that it really is not, or if you were raised in Santa Barbara, you've probably been rolling your eyes at me half this time, which full respect, I totally get. I I will join you in an eye roll as well. But these are some really still with us contemporary conceptions of what Santa Barbara is and the history that we're going to be talking about today, but also every Thursday of this quarter is going to be casting light on Santa Barbara. So because this week was focused more on a deep history, I am doing a larger kind of overview of what we will be talking about throughout this quarter. But every Thursday as we go, I will be taking kind of the time period and themes that we're covering in the week and then put a spotlight on Santa Barbara. So when we're in the early 20th century, for example, we're going to be considering the 1920 to 1960 tourist and surf culture between Carpinteria and Santa Barbara. I'm trying to remember other examples, but you can clearly see it in the syllabus. This, again, because this week was a deeper history, we are kind of doing an introduction to a lot of the material that we're going to be thinking about, a lot of the material that we're going to be working through on the Thursdays of class. I do this for a couple reasons. I won't tell you all of them because I do not want to answer your weekly response question, but I do think that it is important to know the history of the places that you live and you work. I think that it is important to see things in a really big way when we're getting started with an introduction. I'm sorry if you're hearing a drill. I think I live right next to an elementary school that is doing construction. I'm sorry. Can't get away from noise. I really wish I could go to my office at UCSB. Anyway, all of this is to say that I think that taking this approach is really useful. I can't wait to hear why you think it's useful. I'm really trying to stop myself from saying why I think it's useful. But I also want to do this because one of the prompts for the final, you don't necessarily have to do this, but I'm going to encourage whoever is interested to write a tour of a place with at least 6 or 7 spots of a town or city in California and try to apply some of the history that we've been talking about today. And these spots will have to be historical. These spots will have to, not just be in the 20th century, but I'm really curious to, introduce you to this technique of telling history, hopefully encourage you to at least have some interest in your local history, because there are not only intellectual stakes in that, I will also say political stakes in understanding how things work around you. Um, and then hopefully, you could potentially, if you write a tour, you could actually give it to your friends and family. And I think that that is a really cool opportunity to actually have a deliverable besides hopefully a really good grade on your transcript. So Santa Barbara, deep history. I'm not going to walk you through the geology again. Do not worry. We're going to actually start here in Seaxton. So this is a picture from The Independent when Seaxton Story Circle was made in 2011. These were the elders and community members who led the project that we saw the video of yesterday. And they're just really cool but normal people, and they're Chumash, and they are representative of where and what Santa Barbara has been since the very beginning, at least the very beginning of people being present. So Santa Barbara used to be Seaxton. It was the biggest Chumash collection of people. I'm unsure what the Chumash word for city or town would be, but they had thousands of people here. Between Malibu and San Luis Obispo, this was the most bubbling place. This had the most people. This is partially uh, because we're on the coast. It's also because it was a connector to the folks who lived on the Channel Islands. But Siexton is Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara is Siexton. And another thing that I have heard from Chumash folks in particular, but also like many people from different indigenous groups, is that there's this belief that indigenous people never traveled. That isn't true. Of course, in the Sexton Story Circle video, we heard about the use of tummels, which you can see here. It's a seaworthy plank canoe made out of redwood and asphaltum, which is raw oil that is seeping all through the Santa Barbara Channel. But this was a different archaeology and anthropology and linguistics, actually. A group of folks from those three disciplines have been working together over the past 20 years, finding connections between the Chumash Tummel and the Polynesian Kumula'au. And they're finding evidence that between 400 to 800 CE, that Polynesians had actually came to Siexton and talked about, I mean, they talked about lots of things probably we do not know, but we have evidence that they probably traded some ideas about how to ensure that you had the most seaworthy of boats that you possibly could. For more information, I have a couple articles if you're interested. I do have to note it is a little bit debated at the beginning. Some folks, especially Chumash folks, felt that this kind of research was undermining Chumash kind of, what's the word? Not integrity, but the ability for Chumash to come up with this technology by themselves. I am not Chumash. I do not have a stake in this, but from what I have seen from other commentators since, is that this work is more to illustrate the mobility of different indigenous folks way before Spanish or British or other European explorers were trying to figure out the world. This is emphasizing that indigenous folks not tied to, any sort of like global Western empire wanted to know how the world worked and wanted to meet more people on it. So know that there are debates, but that there are connections between these two very different, very far apart uh, indigenous groups who, perhaps were sharing knowledge. But then we do, of course, have a line of different explorers. So um, it is unclear if a British Sir Francis Drake actually came to Santa Barbara. That is still highly disputed. We do know that a Portuguese sailor for the Spanish Empire, Juan Rodriguez Cabrillo, who lived between 1499 and 1543, uh, did arrive, and we know this through his diaries. We also know this through the verbal, oral traditions of the Chumash, but mostly we know this because of all of the things that followed after. So he first arrived in the Chumash town called Mishapshno, which he nearly immediately renamed Carpinteria because he was so impressed with their use of tummels and their use of being able to manipulate wood. So Mishapshno was changed into the Spanish equivalent of little carpenter shop. And he arrives in 1542. As you can see, in contrast to his dates, this is within the year that he dies. And so during this work, he is going up the coast, probably up to maybe around San Luis Obispo. He does not get to San Francisco, but he moves up and down the coast, um, and he was attacked on the Channel Islands. He broke his arm, and it is unclear if he died on the Channel Islands or in San Diego. He has a memorial, um, at both sites, made for a couple reasons, but the biggest one being that they were remade from memorials that archaeology had found from 1543. So we can see here, to the left, a picture of Cabrillo as a stamp, and he's called the Explorer of California. But with this kind of knowledge, it doesn't seem like a fit title. These explorers aren't necessarily explorers, they're working for empires, and they aren't necessarily discovering anything, right? Because of course folks have been living in this land for at least in Santa Barbara, at least 9,000 years. But you know, in the land that is now the US, up to 12,500 years. So we always have to kind of consider our language. We always have to kind of question the things that we see, because after all, we started this lecture thinking about the modern conceptions, the contemporary conceptions of Santa Barbara, which, if you've ever lived there, you know they aren't quite true, or they aren't true in the way that a simplified version of them shows. You can't fit, to put it another way, you can't fit genocide and an explanation of kickstarting genocide on the stamp, right? And then I saw in the chat, I think it was Giselle said that there's a high school named after him in Lompoc. Yes, a lot of these names you are going to be very familiar to you, because there's a lot of schools named after these folks. There's also street names all over the place of these folks. So they're not going to be strangers to you. And potentially, I know this happened to me as I started digging more and more into this history. I couldn't run away from these names. I kept seeing them wherever I went. So I'm sorry, and you're welcome for this blessing and curse that I am now giving you. The next round of, again, in scare quotes, explorers, or we could call them visitors. We could call them lots of things, right, buddy? No, I know. I'm not a big fan of Gaspar di Portola either, buddy, but we're just going to have to go through it. I know. Buddy, the explorer, they need to know the history of explorers. Okay. And they need to know why explorer isn't the right term. So Gaspar de Portola is the next of the Spanish Empire to sail out. His dates are here, 1716 to 1786. I'm also including his chaplain, Father Juan Crespi, who, was pretty contemporaneous, born 1721, 1782. I'm including him here for a couple reasons. One is, I'm just going to have Buddy on my lap. One is that he was a massive diarist, and we know so much of the development of Santa Barbara, so Siuxton becoming Santa Barbara, through his writings as he went on the Portola expedition. So the Portola expedition was just between 1769 and 1770, but they they got a lot of distance. They made a lot of progress. As you can see, they went between Cape Mendocino in the north all the way down through Mexico. I am unclear where they ended in Mexico. I couldn't find that in time for lecture. Okay, buddy, you need to calm down. I know we don't like the mission system. I know you at least don't, but it's okay. Why this expedition was so important and why the inclusion of Father Juan Crespi was so important is that this mission was very helpful to Father Sarah. Father Sarah might sound familiar to you, and you might be, why does that sound familiar? How do I know this person? It sounds so familiar. It's on the tip of my tongue. Well, Father Junipero Serra here, 1713 to 1784, started the mission system in California and has been in the news quite a lot, especially recently with statues of his that are found all through California, if not even further, honestly, because 5 years ago, he was canonized a saint in the Catholic Church. But his statues have been taken down. So most of these statues, buddy, I know. Father Sarah is a complicated, controversial figure. But these statues are, many of these were not necessarily historic. Most of them were actually created in the early 20th century. They were mass replicas of maybe a statue that was more historical, maybe never existed at all. But there, in the early 20th century, there was a huge surge through different heritage groups that tended to skew in ways that we would view now as conservative. But these included the Daughters of the Revolution, so women who could trace their lineage back to their ancestors fighting for the American cause and the American Revolution. Also, Daughters of the Confederacy, who could do similar genealogical work for the Civil War. You had a lot of different heritage groups that wanted to infuse a sense of history into California, because California had joined the Union, had joined the United States, later in the game than East Coast states had. Joining California becomes a state in 1850. And so we have these statues that are erected most of the time without interpretation. That means, a lot of signage with no critical aspects of it at all. It is just, many of them, at least the ones that I've seen, are exactly what I have on the slide right here. So activists, especially indigenous activists within this isn't a new practice, but many in the last 5 to 10 years have been doing more direct action. And when we talk about activism in Santa Barbara, I'll explain more of what that means. But direct action of adding more, we could call this adding more interpretation to the statues. So saying that, yes, he was a murderer and he had blood on his hands. So the California mission system, this is a really helpful map that talks about a person who walked all of them, which that's really cool. I personally would never do that. But this is the most clear map I could find that shows all 21 of them and actually names them. So how it goes, the mythology of this is that Father Sarah would start at one mission, and he would go all the way, and the mythology again would be that he would make a mission, and then he would walk for a day up the coast, and then he would make a mission there. And then he would keep going and going. Again, this is the mythology where like there are many other reasons why it would be useful for, you know, these places to exist relatively close by, but also be on the coast. They could get supplies sent to them very readily. They could um, they could interface with basically anybody, any other quote unquote explorers or visitors, and convert them to Christianity, but also to have some surveillance in this land really that they were really in control of this land and that no interlopers would interfere. Giselle asked, each mission is within 1 day of each other, right? So they wouldn't be traveling at night. Yes. So that's kind of the mythology of it. But there are many more reasons why like they would want it to be spaced out this way. And it's really unclear how we can actually know that, because all of these walkers aren't around anymore, and we don't know how fast they walk. But yes, that is at least the kind of the myth that surrounds the mission system. So Santa Barbara mission, here's buddy, they have to know about the mission, baby. So the Santa Barbara mission was established in 1786. It was named after Saint Barbara, who you can see here. She was Syrian, so she very likely did not look like that. I cannot speak to her halo, but maybe she did. Saint Barbara, I know, buddy. They need it. They need to know. They need to know. Hold on 1 second. I'm going to help buddy. Okay. Buddy, oh my goodness. Go. He's playing with a giant carrot, so I think he's happy and will be entertained at least for the next like half hour. So Saint Barbara was a Syrian saint who's the patron of a lot of military tactics, which is fitting, as you'll see later. We do have Santa Barbara does have a lot of military connections. Also, probably because of this, that she was for artillery, the patron of artillerymen, the patron of, I'm trying to remember, lightning, blacksmiths, something else. It's tied to her, the story that made her canonized as a saint. Her father was not pleased with her conversion to Christianity, and so he tried to kill her, and then God smote him. So she became a saint for that miracle, and because of what she stood for, Father Sarah and the other Franciscan friars that he worked with were like named this place Santa Barbara. Okay, I see some things in the chat. Awesome. Yes. So also because she was very fitting for this place, because if you've been downtown, you've probably seen the Presidio, which is a California State Park landmark, and you can actually see the building and different replicas that they've made and the upkeep of it. But a Presidio is a fort, and there was a high military presence in the area at the end of the 18th century. Okay, we got some things going off in the chat again. Yes, okay. So Andrew and Giselle, yes, you're talking about the, each mission being 1 day apart. And like I said, this is the mythology of it. We do not know for sure, but yes, this is a belief, but we are not sure. But we have so many of these missions because of the potential for surveillance of not only the different indigenous people, so in Santa Barbara, the Chumash, but also the surveillance and the protection of the land from other people who were not from Spain. So contrary to the image of, you know, of the Spanish fantasy past of kind of sleepy and harmonious missions, we heard in the Sexton story circle that there were two revolts. There are pictures of these revolts, and there are pictures of different Chumash people experiencing the missions, both, you know, in a happy Spanish fantasy past way, but also in the violence that they experienced, that we know that they experienced, and we will talk in a respectful way about next week. But um, for these two images, I want to, for in talking about the Chumash Revolt in 1801 and 1824, I want to not show those pictures, but instead show the Chumash continuing and thriving and living. This idea is called indigenous futurity, which is something we will also talk about next week. So the other revolt, so in 1801, the revolt was a woman who had a dream, who had a prophecy that she was to reject Christianity and go back to the old ways. That was a bloodless revolt. The revolt in 1824 was a bloody revolt, and it involved the missions of Santa Ynez, Santa Barbara, and La Purísima. So during this revolt of a few weeks, most of the Santa Ynez mission complex was burned down. Once the Chumash withdrew from Santa Ynez upon the arrival of military reinforcements, they then attacked Mission La Purísima from inside, eventually forcing the garrison to surrender. The Chumash of Santa Barbara captured the mission also actually without bloodshed. So in Santa Ynez and La Purísima, people did die, but at Santa Barbara it was without bloodshed, but they did have to retreat into the Los Padres forest. This was somewhat made possible by the it wasn't necessarily a decline of mission culture, rather than a decline of resources from Spain. And Mexico eventually, Mexico becomes Mexico. Santa Barbara becomes part of Mexico very soon after, and partially because the mission system is so weak. So we have the Mexican Secularization Act of 1833. So like I said, 12 years after Mexico won independence, Spain and the mission system worked hand in hand. And so Mexico wanted to get rid of the mission system altogether, just get rid of it completely. So they took the land and they broke it into pieces and sold them as land grants. This is a system that was similarly used 30 to 40 years later in the US, with a different kind of land grant system over the US Western territories as well. Famously also in California, where these Mexican land grants became, after statehood, Californian land grants. This was made possible by Father Jose Figueroa, who actually wrote the first history book of California, which you can see here, from 1835, Manifesto a la República Mexicana, which is not a critical history either, but it was his attempt to kind of capture how Mexico took over what was considered Alta California, and how the mission system fared within it. It can be hard. It can be hard to get copies of this, and I do not speak enough Spanish. I am working on my German, and then I will work more on Spanish. But Father Jose Figueroa, in this book, but also in his actions, really worked on mission secularization. And as a father, he tried, as a Catholic priest rather, he tried to ease it so that it wasn't uh, a complete decline of Catholicism in California, that it wasn't a complete erasure of the missions. And for most of that, mostly because of his work and then preservationists after, we still have the missions that we do today. Um, in Santa Barbara, some of these really uh, really expensive, really rich, really now famous, as you can see in different street names in California. We have the De La Guerra family and the Carrillo families. They benefited greatly from the land grants that they purchased, and they used the land to um, mostly to ranch, but also they used it, depending on where their site was, to make businesses. And because Santa Barbara is so close to the coast, they were able to sell those things and make more money. So with mission secularization, without the different garrisons from Spain, where during the time that Santa Barbara is under Mexican control, we start seeing more and more visitors from elsewhere. Also, folks who are European, again, not just Spanish, but from other European places. We see people from Australia starting to sail. We see, and these aren't people who are tied to any empire. They're just trying to make their own money. They're trying to figure out different ways for them to get rich. And for these two families, um, I mean, there are lots of reasons why they were able to become as famous as they were in Santa Barbara, but a lot of it, as it is, I would say, probably in life, is very much being in the right place at the right time with the right resource. We also had Governor Pio Pico, who was the last governor of Alta California before California becomes a state. And we need to note that he is very, very rich, very, very expensive. And if you've been to LA, you've been to Alvarez Street, I saw that a few of you in the chat said that you were really interested in that history. You should know that he owned the Pico House, a 33 room hotel, which was located on the piece of land that is now opposite Vera Street today. So he has a lot of history in LA. He did have connections to Santa Barbara at this time, even though LA downtown, what's now downtown LA, and Santa Barbara have about 110 miles between them. They were still in much people with means were very much in communication between these two cities. He had a working relationship with Santa Barbara Joseph Stearns, who owned the Stearns Wharf, for example. So a lot of what becomes Southern California, as we understand it now, is very much run by a circle of maybe 20 and 30 people who, like I said, right place, right time, and have lots of money to make lots of decisions. So these land grants are called ranchos. So fun fact, the school that UC Santa Barbara is on was called Rancho dos Pueblos. It was bought by a European American who was named Nicholas Den, and you can see a drawing of it right here. I think that it's very confusing that the mountain is also the same color of the ocean, at least to my eyes, but we can kind of see how all of campus basically was on that one rancho. later, as things progress, California becomes a state in 1850. We have more and more Euro Americans who are later grabbing up parcels of land grants. So the people who had Mexican land grants uh, fought with courts to find ways to make it their own California land grants. As you maybe can imagine, those who were Euro American who had Mexican land grants more easily were able to keep their land grants and make them California land grants. Um, and so because of that, we see an upsurgence of Euro Americans coming to Santa Barbara. One of them was Elwood Cooper, who, like I said, a couple days ago, especially on the land around UCSB, introduced 150,000 eucalypts to the area in 1872 as part of a larger network of botanical experimenters. And I include this last part not just because, again, it's a shout out to my favorite, to plants, but it's also a note of thinking about the connections that people are making further and further out. And as technology is advancing, we are we are getting even more and more industrious at the end of the 19th century, definitely going into the 20th century. You have more and more connection, you have more and more communication between people with similar interests. And we are seeing the professionalization, not just of sciences and not just of business and not just of law, but we're seeing professionalization of other things. And part of this has to do with school. I saw something in the chat really quick. I just want to check it. Okay. Yeah, and eucalyptus is an invasive species. Eucalyptus, I will not go off too much on a tangent, but it excretes a mild toxin in it. So eucalyptus oil is also similar to, or it is tea tree oil. So if you've ever used that as an antiseptic, it is very good for us, like humans, or for treating wounds. It is not good for the soil, and so it kills off smaller plants and sometimes even animals. So very invasive. But like I said, with all of this professionalization going on, with all of these networking opportunities that are happening, we need schools. And so between 1889 to 1920, we have something called the Santa Barbara State Normal School. So this is for primarily for people of a working age, so around 14 and over, to learn different trades. Actually, Booker T. Washington visited the school, I want to say either at its opening or a couple years after. There are some really cool newspaper clippings if you look it up. He gave a talk, I think. But we have the Santa Barbara State Normal School, which is later turned into uh, and kind of blown up and expanded by the Santa Barbara State Teachers School, which started in 1921 and 1934. Really beautiful architecture, and this was all in downtown. While all of this is happening, though, another industry is happening, which I think I hinted to earlier this week, is oil. So we have early Santa Barbara oil happening. These are both from 1900. The top is from Summerland, I want to say, which is about 20 miles south of Santa Barbara. The bottom is from Santa Barbara. The plot of land that UCSB is now on looked very much like this. So if you've ever been to Coal Oil Point, the nature reserve on campus, you just imagine that we don't just have platform holly out there, but all of these long piers that just have, depending on the time period, either a mechanized version of, or actual, or very early on, men who are taking just a big long metal stick and poking it all the way down to try to get oil to come out, and then they would siphon it out and process it on shore. So a lot of these land grants, whether first Mexican and then Californian, a lot of these land grants were broken up into even smaller amounts so that um, anybody who was industrious could have one of these piers. And so each of these piers may be owned by one person if they had some money, or a group of people, or even multiple families who are all working there to try to strike big. So so we have oil. We also have rich fancy people who don't have to try to work for a living, whether it be oil um, or learning different trades at the normal school or teacher's school. We have people who are just relaxing until we hit World War II. So when the war expands to have a Pacific front, California's coastline was very worried and very concerned by attacks from Japan. And it turns out that with some good reason, a Japanese submarine shelled this actually might be the Elwood oil field now that I'm thinking of it, shelled right around here. Of course, oil had looked a little different by, we can see in this newspaper, this primary source, 1942. Um, but there was still oil going on. There was still oil processing going on. They tried to shut it down as much as they could. However, people need to make a living. So we have a Japanese submarine that shells the Elwood oil field. So Elwood Mesa, right by Coal Oil Point. It's turning into a bigger nature and recreation area in the next few years. That place was completely shelled. If we had time, I would show you a clip of from a news story, I want to say from the 70s, where an older gentleman remembers this experience, and basically nothing really bad happened. The submarine was really off, because they were not just trying to create damage by blowing up oil processing. What they were really trying to get was a marine base, which is on the land that is now the airport as we know it today. So this was actually one of the only, besides Pearl Harbor, the only attacks on U.S. land in World War II. We also had more schools. So after the war, we have more schools that are getting started. So we have the Helena Devereaux Ranch School. Again, if you've been around Coal Oil Point, you may have seen signs for the Devereaux Ranch School. It used to be much bigger. It used to be it moved to downtown Santa Barbara as well. So maybe you've seen Devereaux noted there. But Helena Devereaux was what we would consider a special needs educator before special needs were recognized either professionally or publicly. And so she worked with folks who needed different kinds of resources and materials and considerations in their education, and did so at the beach. This was the first school of its kind, and was actually a good model of how to work with folks who just needed a little bit more help to learn not only about the world around them, but trades, and to be self-sustaining. And a lot of the work that she did kickstarted a lot of good work that took folks who had different needs out of what at the time were called asylums, which we would now call mental institutions, and actually just gave them the resources to do what they needed to do. I just like to include that it was only it was only at that site between 1946 to 1964. Then it sold off some of its land and and just had the site that it now has at Coal Oil Point. But they still do work. I believe the school is still open. Even I'm unsure what COVID did to it. But let us take this even more homeward and think about UCSB. So we have UCSB, which initially was in downtown before 1944, but it comes to Goleta as we know it in 1944 through some magic of zoning. It is still considered Santa Barbara rather than Goleta, so it has the fancy, the fanciness, the mystique that comes with being Santa Barbara. You know, this now hundreds of years old city, rather than Goleta, which means schooner in Spanish. So it moves from downtown to Goleta, but it's still considered Santa Barbara. And it was on a site that was a World War II Marine Air Base. So, like I said earlier, Santa Barbara has a long history of the military and different military work, whether it was the Presidio, whether it was we had not only uh, the like a Marine air base. We also had Army barracks in Santa Barbara. I'm sure we also had Navy connections that I'm not even aware of. We had all of this infrastructure, especially at the beginning of the 20th century, that could be used to create different institutions that were less military but still industrial, like a school. So UCSB comes to the site in 1944. It's known as the Santa Barbara State School, and then it enters the UC system, you know, with UCLA and Berkeley in 1958. So we have 1958, we have the school figuring itself out, really changing the overall structure and feel of Santa Barbara. Oh, we are almost out of time. I'm sorry. Santa Barbara becomes more of a college town, uh, but also uh, a party area, a weekend destination, etc. We have the Santa Barbara oil spill in 1969. It is huge. It is the biggest of its kind. It creates all of this damage, and it creates also an uproar. I will show you this video later, but it's a whole bunch of angry environmentalists. And there's a huge public response to this oil spill because I mean, it is massive, it is scary, um, and there's also ways to communicate how massive and scary it was. So not only photography, but also newspapers that didn't just have a local circulation, they were also national and international. Everybody, people all over the world were up in arms about how an industry could be allowed to do this. And so through this public outcry, this bill was in 1969. By 1970, we have the first Earth Day, which was April 22nd, 1970. This is also made possible through politics and activism. So we have Nixon, who is a Californian. We also have Reagan, who's a former Hollywood elite. We have all sorts of things. I'm so sorry, I'm running out of time, and so I'm trying to make this very quick, but we'll get into this more later. We also have a lot of activism on UCSB's campus, not only environmental, but just very socially minded. We have the takeover of North Hall around this time, because we had military computers on campus. One of my friends studies it, and it's fascinating. That history is fascinating. They also burnt down the US Bank building in Isla Vista, which is very cool. And if you go to the Ivy Co-op, I'm sure its owner, Melissa, would love to tell you more about it. She knows a lot about it. And yeah, so we've had a lot of oil spills in California still. We had one in just 2015 right up from Santa Barbara. We still have a lot of oil, even though some of it's getting shut down. We still have a lot of it. We have hundreds of thousands of oil wells just off our like Santa Barbara County's coast. So very quickly, I want you to just write a couple sentences for your attendance question, and I look forward to reading more of it in your response. Why is it important to know the histories of the places you live and work? Just write a sentence or two, and if you don't have any questions after you submit your answer, feel free to go. Take care of yourself, and I will see you week after next. I will not see you next week. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'm also going to